We're excited to share how we are advancing inclusion and equity at Yahoo and hope that you and your organizations can benefit from this session. Before we begin, here's a snapshot of our agenda today, just so you can get an understanding of the roadmap for our discussion. We'll start with intros, move on to the basics, then tackle business initiatives at Yahoo, discuss some positive business outcomes, provide takeaways from the session, and finally, we'll leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. Before we get any further though, let's get acquainted with some quick intros. My name is Cindy Joung. I am the head of product inclusion at Yahoo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Asian woman with shoulder-length black hair. Usually at this time, I do a land acknowledgement when I'm at home, but today I am actually dialing in from South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and I am not sure which indigenous populations were on this land. And I will pass it on to my colleague, Malcolm.
Hello, my name is Malcolm Jones. I'm a senior product manager on the product inclusion team at Yahoo. I'm a Black male with short black hair, currently wearing a black t-shirt that says Asian Black Unity. My pronouns are he, him. Denise?
Hi everyone, my name is Denise Olagi and I'm a senior program manager on the accessibility and product inclusion team. I'm an Asian Latina woman in my 30s. I have black hair with gold highlights and glasses, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm really excited to be here, and to set the stage, I'm going to start with a little history of where we've been as a company in terms of accessibility. And I did want to make a quick note that throughout our slides, we do have a lot of decorative images. And so because of the limitation with time, we won't be describing all of them, but we do have alternative text on our slides if you want to check those out on your own. So, history of accessibility at Yahoo. We have more than 15 years of history of having a central accessibility team and accessibility labs in both our New York City and Silicon Valley offices. We offer summer internships for accessibility. We have an ever-evolving team of accessibility experts, and they often include people with disabilities, including myself. I identify as having low vision and started with the team a little over 3 years ago. I have a background in education, ed tech, and nonprofit, and now lead all of accessibility training and program management for the team. Here on screen, or the slide before, you would have seen photos of the Yahoo Accessibility Lab in Sunnyvale, California, New York City, and our iconic Silicon Valley Yahoo logo. So we're here at AxCon. I'm sure a lot of you already have a sense of what digital accessibility is and what it means, but we wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Here at Yahoo, we define accessibility as when websites, apps, tools, and technologies are designed, constructed, developed, and maintained so that all people, including those with disabilities, can fully and independently use them. And we honestly, truly believe and have the approach that accessibility makes products better for everyone. I'll pass it off to my teammates now to explain how accessibility fits into a larger picture of product inclusion.
Thank you, Denise. So before diving into product inclusion, I just wanted to set the stage with a little bit of context about Malcolm and myself. We are the product inclusion team. So Malcolm and I come from product management. Malcolm came to product management from B2B, which is business to business, after working as a solutions engineer. And I myself have been a PM for over a decade on consumer products in the entertainment and media industries. So a few years ago, I was thinking a lot about my own career and how I wanted to move it forward, because I knew I wanted to incorporate inclusion and equity into my work, especially because I had been doing advocacy and equity work through my volunteer commitments and as an employee resource group lead along with Malcolm. And that's when I stumbled upon product inclusion, which at its core, as defined in this slide, is just the practice of applying an inclusive lens to the product development process. I love the idea behind this work and pitched a new role to my leadership, and our team was born. So some of you may be wondering how this is different from accessibility, which is also focused on making products inclusive and equitable and has been around for decades. For us, product inclusion zooms out a bit and takes a more macro approach and considers all the dimensions of identity. So on this slide, we show how to represent our lived experiences through 4 concentric circles. At the core, you have your individual identity or personality. Then you have your internal or core attributes, things you can't control per se, like your ability or age. If you take one step out, there are more invisible characteristics that define you, like class, family status, and finally, the tertiary dimension, which deals with your values and attitudes. So everyone has different lived experiences that encompass attributes from across these concentric circles, and this affects how they move about in the world. So while a disability may affect how you interact with a product, so may any of these other attributes or demographics. Product inclusion then seeks to understand this intersectionality and asks, how is the product in question serving them? Is it inclusive? Does it provide authentic representation, or some part of the person's identity underserved, misrepresented, or even excluded completely? And if so, why? And how can we innovate or iterate the product in order to solve this gap? So this slide that's on screen right now just shows a graphic of a voice assistant, a home voice assistant. And on this slide, I just wanted to convey the point that often it's hard to define successful inclusion, because when it's done right, everything works. There's no complaints, no one has to hack the experience, but exclusion is more acute. And so I'd like to use a really simplified example to demonstrate how product inclusion expands on the scope of accessibility. So this example, as I said, of voice assistants. And before I go on, I just want to say there's a ton of work and thought leadership on how to design voice experiences. So I'm not calling out specific companies, insinuating this work isn't being done. Rather, I just really wanted like an oversimplified example of how to convey what we do. So for the sake of this exercise, let's look at the core product offering and see how product inclusion might work. A voice-powered assistant from an accessibility perspective would maybe ask, how does someone who is deaf or hard of hearing or someone with a speech impairment going to use this product? On the flip side, it may even ask, how does a voice assistant solve for barriers and obstacles faced by people who are maybe blind? So product inclusion asks those same exact questions, but also looks at other dimensions of diversity. So for example, how are people who speak localized languages or dialects blocked from using the assistant? Are there regional words and phrases understood by this tech? Similarly, can people with accents be understood? Do connectivity issues create a barrier for someone to use this tech? Does the voice of the assistant feel representative of the user? And then there's our populations that are blocked from this experience, but could benefit exponentially from its use. So for example, young children, digital immigrants, or people with low to no education may have trouble interacting with technology, or they might not be able to give commands with proper context, but the use of a voice assistant could actually help them overcome barriers in tech, because speech is pretty intuitive and doesn't require reading or understanding complex UI. So that's just, again, very oversimplified, but just wanted to convey our point of what we're trying to do in product inclusion. And now I'll hand it off to Malcolm.
Thanks. So Cindy just discussed exclusion can take on many forms. On this slide, we have 12 headlines clipped from different news sources showing various ways users are excluded from products that we use every day. This includes products both in the physical and digital space. These relate to machine learning, advertising practices, search algorithms, photography, and more. I'm intentionally not reading through all of them as it's meant as more of a decorative touch. This also isn't meant to call out any one company, as Cindy said before. I'll note Yahoo is on this list, but rather we want to show how widespread exclusion is and all the forms it can take. The sporadic nature of the slide, where headlines are overlapping each other and taking up all of the available space, leans into how overwhelming these issues are for people. Not only does it hinder the experience of quote unquote fun products like Snapchat's Juneteenth filter, but can have life and career altering ramifications like the hiring algorithm at Amazon that discriminated against women. Now that we have discussed examples of real world exclusion, let's talk about why we should care about product inclusion. For most of us, we have a good sense of the social reason behind inclusion, and as product builders, once we are exposed to various inequities and injustices brought about by our products, we can't go back to claiming ignorance. On the other side of that coin, in the corporate space, we realize that we work within a business and we want to make money. That's like the bottom line. We want to make money and grow. Product inclusion is a driver for this. User growth and increased engagement will come from users who feel genuinely represented and who don't feel like they have to hack the product to make it work for them. Innovation arises as we start to lean on diverse perspectives throughout the business. This is also a forcing mechanism that causes us to think about how to create solutions that are more representative of our users and meets them where they are. Lastly, this work protects the business from bad press. from training for the wrong reasons, and even from litigation, the likes of which we see time and time again in the accessibility space. I'm going to pass it back to Denise to discuss some initiatives we have going on.
Great. Thanks so much, Malcolm. So now we've shared a little bit about the why behind the work that we do and the industry context. And now we'd like to share a few examples of business initiatives that our team has implemented to better create and achieve our inclusion and accessibility goals. The first one is our global accessibility policy. So we launched this official global accessibility policy in partnership with our legal and compliance team. And it pretty much says, the legal jargon wasn't available for public consumption, but I'll sum it up here, that everything we do at Yahoo will meet globally accepted guidelines and standards for accessibility and best practices for the inclusion of people with disabilities. This is a really big step for us since we had been historically relying on the goodwill, championship model, and passion of employees to drive accessibility initiatives. And now we really have a more formal top-down process and policy to support our work. So the next one is the Accessibility Council. And in conjunction with our policy, we launched a cross-departmental council with over 50 representatives from each major domain in the company. For example, product, engineering, design, marketing, advertisement, HR, procurement, editorial, IT, and legal. The goal of the council is to have a cross-functional communication, collaboration, and community of folks to help embed accessibility standards into each domain's processes and systems. We hold monthly meetings and have started to have guest speakers and help problem solve together. On screen, you'll see a screenshot of a remote meeting of our council members smiling and cheering at the camera. Next, we'll share some examples about how we've embedded accessibility throughout Yahoo. Something we're really proud of is our HR team launched a training for all recruiters on best practices for including people with disabilities in the talent acquisition process. HR also launched a global accommodations process for all candidates and employees to ensure that they have what they need to succeed and thrive at work. Our internal comms team has been really well trained on how to best use our internal tools, such as including alternative text and captions and corporate communications to ensure that all employees have what they need to access important information. Our engineering and design teams are working together to track and fix accessibility bugs throughout the Accessibility Bug Program and ensure that our products are born accessible, trying to do more proactive work rather than reactive work by ensuring that accessibility is included in the entire product development and design process. 100% of our English language videos are also closed caption, including third-party content, which is above and beyond what is required of us by law, as we know that there are many different use cases for captions beyond benefiting those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Last fall, we launched a marketing campaign all about the usability and accessibility of our Yahoo Fantasy app and created a mini documentary featuring real-life users who created the all-blind fantasy football league. Check out the AxCon presentation all about Yahoo Fantasy. And lastly, we collaborated with the procurement and legal team to create an accessibility expectations document for vendors and partners to ensure that everything we purchase as a company knows our expectations for accessibility. We believe that accessibility work should be shared and know that when we work together across sectors, we create greater impact. So there are two different organizations that Yahoo is really proud to be a part of, Teach Access and XR Access. Teach Access empowers students to enter the workforce with accessibility knowledge. It's a collaboration among education, industry, and disability advocacy organizations. And if you want to check out more, please go to teachaccess.org. XR Access is a community committed to making virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, or XR, accessible for people with disabilities. If you want to learn more, go to xraccess.org. Now back to Malcolm for more business initiatives on product inclusion.
Thank you. So product inclusion at Yahoo has both an internal and external lens with which we try to move the needle on building more inclusive products. On the internal front, one thing we did over the past year was ask ourselves, how might we include a wider cross-section of diverse voices as a part of our product development process? But really, this applies to any process we have at the company. With that question and idea as a North Star, we pulled together a cross-functional team from around the company and developed a platform called Sounding Board. This is an internal tool that allows any person or team to proactively and easily gather feedback or insights from a group of diverse voices within the company. There's two sides to this tool. On one side, you have volunteers who register on the platform, giving their interests, area of expertise, ERG affiliations, and anything else that makes them unique. This creates a database of diverse people willing to review ideas and projects, participate in surveys or focus group, or those who just want to collaborate on something together. On the other side, project owners submit a description of their project and can recruit people from within the volunteer pool to give feedback, reactions, and insights on the project or idea. This can be used for internal projects or initiatives and even our core products and ad campaigns. The image on the right of the screen shows a screen capture of Sounding Board with a grid of projects on the homepage. Now, moving over to the external focus of product inclusion here at Yahoo, I want to quickly highlight one way that we are seeking to better understand our users. So ComScore is a good partner of ours. We use them to get data on who our users are and how we index against certain demographics compared to our peers in the industry. Early last year, we noticed that we didn't have audience insights that included users with disabilities. So we made a concerted effort to work with them to change that. And towards the end of last year, we rolled out updates to the Plan Metrics platform that now includes new audience profiles. These new profiles include users who are blind, who may have visual impairment, those who are deaf or who may have a hearing impairment, or those with speech impairments, or anyone who may have a physical disability. With these newly added targets, companies can now see what the makeup of their users are who self-identify as having a disability. Having access to this information allows us to continue to better understand who we are serving and the products that we build. So looking back over the initiatives we just discussed, you can see that they span across the entire product development lifecycle. From ideation through launch, there's not a single step that accessibility and product inclusion does not touch. Neither of these should be treated as mere checkpoints along the way, but rather a continuous partnership across teams and functions throughout the organization, working to identify untapped areas of opportunity and potential gaps. Next, we'll have Cindy highlight some of these successful partnerships within the organization.
All right. So before moving on, I know we're covering a lot very, very quickly. So I just want to take a moment to maybe summarize where we're at. So Malcolm and Denise and I have gone over what product inclusion is, how it expands on the work accessibility has been doing to address the how it expands on the work accessibility has been doing, and to look at the other dimensions of identity that I showed you with those concentric circles. We've also shown you why it's important and what it looks like. And, we discussed how we're moving product inclusion and accessibility forward at Yahoo. And now we really want to highlight how our work has created the positive business outcomes, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is work for a company. And so we have to present that business case, which Malcolm touched on earlier. So next slide. This slide is just a bullet pointed list that I'll be talking through of the examples of our positive business outcomes. So Denise covered the first few bullets, but I'll just reiterate a few of them. So through the work that the accessibility team has been doing, we do have a process to caption 100% of our English language videos. We've established clear vendor expectations for accessibility, and we've launched an ABUG program that has been adopted across all of our product and engineering orgs. The next set of bullets really captures what Malcolm and I have been working on from a product inclusion perspective. So as Malcolm touched on, we recognize the importance of this two-pronged approach to product inclusion. It requires a diverse and inclusive feedback loop, as well as a diverse and inclusive workforce. So a few highlights that we're proud of on this front. First, we launched something we call internally the Product Ambassador Program. So this is a work stream focused on debiasing product management hiring in order to expand our pipeline and ensure that no candidate is being blocked or eliminated because of any unconscious bias or any other kinds of biases. This also brings our current PMs to the table and pushes us to think about a candidate's potential versus focusing on things like alma mater or corporate pedigree. The work we did in that program actually resulted in our most diverse associate product manager or APM cohort in 2021. So we're very proud of that. And then on the flip side, we're also pushing the diversity of our feedback loop and working with our feedback teams to figure out ways we can make the process more inclusive and inviting from a product perspective. And Additionally, and lastly, we recently opened up a role on our team for our user insights manager, which we're really excited about. We recognize the need for someone to really drive the strategy and approach in which we gather feedback and research. We have an incredibly talented UXR team at Yahoo. You know, they do great work. We also recognize that we needed to ensure that there was a very specific focus and approach in driving inclusivity and meeting people where they're at. Next slide. So, you know, while we're excited about these highlights and outcomes, the work is certainly not done, and you know, it may never be done, but we can only continue to push forward and bring others along on our journey. We don't view this work as IP. It's not necessarily about innovating and being first to market or capture market share or revenue. For Malcolm and I as product managers, it was, you know, complete like 180, because, you know, as PMs, we used to want to innovate and like, you know, be first to market and show the world that like we came up with something new. But this is really a part of an ecosystem where we need to be sharing our wins and our failures across industries, across companies, et cetera. You know, this idea of like getting market share and revenue, those are actually the benefits of product inclusion, but you know, the work has to be done in the ecosystem, and that's kind of where we are in this phase of product inclusion across industries. This idea that we need to create culture shift and we need to push our organizations toward inclusive and equitable thinking. So with that being said, on this final slide, we have some key takeaways. Whether your organization's journey is, you know, yet to begin or already on its way, we have kind of 3 mantras or takeaways that we'd like to share. And at the header, for those of you who can see, says start now. And that's kind of our biggest one. But the 3 that we wanted to share were, number 1, accessibility and inclusion is everyone's job. It must not be assigned to one person or team that's considered the quote specialist, but rather it needs to be the foundation upon which everything is built on, or else gaps will appear and you know, it won't succeed. Number 2, you have to include your users in the conversation and ensure diversity of representation. So as I mentioned previously, you have to open up your feedback loop. You have to innovate on how you get the feedback, and you need to recognize that users, quote unquote users, also include the people within your organization, which is why a diverse and inclusive workforce is just as important, because their lived experiences will help inform and help you innovate. And finally, empower your employees or the people on your teams to easily implement product inclusion in their daily work. So this can take many forms, and it's really dependent on your respective team's culture, the workforce. But some of the ways you can do this is you can just create this culture of learning and sharing, or on the flip side, you can be very, very specific and create standards and best practices. But as I touched on earlier, that's why we really need to be doing this work, not in a vertical or siloed, but across companies, across industries, so that we can start to create these best practices and share you know, ideas. So this process, you know, it will require iteration, but there is a business case to this work, and that's what we're here to convey to you all today. So thank you all for joining us and spending your valuable time. I know there are a lot of great sessions. We'd love to invite your questions or comments, feedbacks, anything.
Thank you, Cindy, Denise, Malcolm, for everybody. My name is Heidi Kelly Gibson. I've been moderating this session, and I will be happy to share some of the questions that have come up while you've been talking. One that was a great one was, when product is incentivized by the number of features instead of by accessibility, compliance, or inclusive design metrics, how do you convince leadership to lead by accessibility at the start?
Denise, you want to take that? Or Malcolm, can you walk me?
Sure, this is Denise. Hi, sure, this is Denise. A great question. And I think it's complex, and it really depends on what type of organization you're in, and also I think context and history of where accessibility and inclusion sits within your organization. We are really lucky at Yahoo that we didn't necessarily need to convince our leadership that accessibility or inclusion was important. It was more about how are we actually going to action and implement accessibility and inclusion throughout our product development lifecycle, and what does that look like in terms of resourcing, in terms of education and training, But I do say if we did need to kind of convey the importance of accessibility or inclusion, we did use a lot of the, I would say, justifications or arguments that we mentioned here at the top of our presentation. So kind of the social, business, and business case combined, and all those different elements of, whether it be brand love, increased market, that products made with accessibility in mind and inclusion in mind are just better for all users and increased usability. And also this idea that we never really wanted to lead with, but that you're protecting the business, right, too, from negative press, reputation, and or litigation. So I think all of those different justifications and reasons help convey the importance of accessibility and inclusion to leadership. And then a second tier part was always around the how. It's like, okay, great. Now that we've bought into the general concept of why it's important, how are you actually going to succeed on implementing? And we've learned through various iterations and through a lot of years of trying different things, partnership and creating co-ownership with other folks in the company who can lead, like on the Accessibility Council I mentioned, their own domains, processes, and systems has really been a successful model for our company and where we're at right now. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
That's awesome. You're right. That is a very complex question. Each organization has to kind of take it on however it works for them. A lot of folks are asking questions about the sounding board. They want to know more. Can you go into more detail about it?
The creation of it, how it functions, all of the above. Are there any specifics there?
So some were just very generic. One specific question was there any concern for volunteers identifying with disabilities that hadn't previously discussed their disability at work? Another question about it, it's just general. They just want to know more, begging for more.
Yeah. So just some background on it. During the creation of it, there was a lot of meetings with legal, understanding how data was going to be stored and protecting user privacy. That was a very technical discussion of, we use AWS for our data storage. So how is that protected, especially like in the EU versus the United States, and then like with California CCPA law, there's just a lot of moving parts there. So a lot of discussions on the legal front. All of the information that we gather is optional. So if you wanted to sign up and be a volunteer on the platform, you don't have to provide anything but your name. And then you provide areas of interest. So if you wanted to give feedback on engineering projects or marketing projects, you can give that information. But everything else, if you're part of an ERG, what your gender is, et cetera, was all optional. So people don't have to provide that information. If they do decide to provide that, that is more for us on the back end to see how the tool is being used, to see if we are getting diverse feedback from folks. We don't want a homogenous group of people using the tool. So no other users on the platform can see that information. But yeah, it's almost like a matchmaking service for projects. And that's kind of the idea that went into creating it. And it was a group of volunteers who put it together, some volunteer engineers and designers. I did the product work, and then a colleague of mine who had the master plan of this whole thing, she kind of got us all together to put it together. So I don't know if that answers. I know you said the answer, there's a lot of questions about it, but I don't know if that answers the ones that were out there.
We'll start there. If anyone has more questions, feel free to still throw them in the Q&A. Yeah. Another question that was asked was, what was your biggest roadblock in shepherding a shift in the culture?
Do you want to take this in, Cindy?
I don't actually think we've hit a roadblock from a culture perspective, because at the end of the day, the work that Malcolm and I are doing in terms of pitching it to people is very welcome and easy, because who wants to say like, no, I don't want to make the product that I'm working on inclusive, right? So when we go to them and we say like, oh, we're this new team, and these are our colleagues that we've worked with for at least a few years now, and we tell them what we're doing, they're like, yes, what can we do? Like, of course I want to make my products more inclusive. So I think in that sense, people are very open to it. So, but as Denise mentioned, it's like now we're working on the how and trying to figure out how to meet in the same ways we want to meet our users where they're at, we need to meet our colleagues where they're at, right? So we can't assume that everybody's kind of like on the same journey when it comes to DEI issues as Malcolm and I are. So we need to figure out how to give them the resources they need. And, it's not just enough for me and Malcolm to champion product inclusion principles or definitions of product inclusion, et cetera. We need to really help figure out, or we need to help each other figure out, where are our colleagues, product teams, and even the products themselves at with respect to product inclusion, and then figure out like, okay, how do now these people or teams need to absorb the information that's maybe missing, like, or is creating the gap. And so it could be, maybe it's some people like to just read up and we can give them maybe a list of third-party classes or podcasts or books, and maybe that's enough, right? And other times working with somebody like Denise, who's really great on learning and development programs, to say like, okay, well, how can we create a kind of a learning program in which it's kind of like workshops or quizzes or whatnot within internal tools, and make that either required or just optional or available. So I think that's the part that we're on right now. And so we'll see. I mean, maybe this time next year we can tell you all the roadblocks we've hit along the way. But I think that's the biggest thing. I think in terms of like roadblocks, so the biggest thing for Malcolm and myself is really just the lack of data, because all this data is very sensitive and is tied to people and their identity. And so one of the things that we're actually, we've attended a lot of sessions at South by Southwest where we're at, to hear other people who are working kind of in inclusive tech, and everyone is kind of struggling with that and trying to figure it out. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways that Malcolm and I had at a session we attended yesterday was like, we need to go become best friends with our legal and policy teams to figure out how we can work with people and, help them understand that we're trying to also bring them value while, getting the information that we need. So I think that's another interesting thing, which in a year from now, we'd love to probably talk to you all about how we did that as well.
There was a follow-up question to that about the roadblocks, is how did you handle funding and allocation of resources?
So I actually, I went out on a limb when I created this position. It was just, so I discovered product inclusion through a woman named Annie Jean-Baptiste, who's head of product inclusion at Google. I randomly read a blog post or an article where she was talking about actually her favorite book. And so then it was like, and then it talked a little bit about who she was and why she liked it. And so I was like, what is product inclusion? And I was very interested in what she was doing because it seemed to really merge product management, which is something that I had been doing and loved and really didn't want to leave in terms of like a discipline or job. But it really infused a lot of this DEI, which is stuff that I was doing kind of on the side as my quote unquote like extracurricular. And so I was trying to figure out how to, actually I was trying to figure out how to work for her, for being honest. And I was, looking up Google job posts. I was like following her on all her social platforms. And then I started to realize that the work, and I mentioned this kind of earlier in the slide, which is it should not be put upon specialists, right? It should not be put upon people who go in and they retain all that information. So in the same way, she does the same thing at Google, where she's trying to champion this and create that culture. And so I thought, well, if she can be doing that at Google, why can't I be doing that at Yahoo? And so I just took down a product manager job posting that we had up, and I wrote up my job description of all the things that I thought Annie was doing that I wanted to be doing. And I talked to my manager in product leadership, and I sold them on the business case, right? Which is that there's a human and social case, which is we want to do good. Of course, we want to be inclusive. Of course, we want to make sure that, people are represented and feel good. But also from the business angle, there are people that we're essentially leaving, out, right? And that translates to money, that translates to our bottom line. And so why wouldn't we want to be going after them? Why wouldn't we want to be creating products that also include and represent them in that same way? And or if the people are already here, but they're hacking their way through the products in a way to make it work for them, why don't we remove that barrier and then make them feel really authentically engaged? And then they're going to start telling people about, how great Yahoo's doing because they did X, Y, and Z. And so I think really helping them understand that there was a business case, helped. And then to be honest, this also all happened in late 2020. And so I think a lot of corporations were thinking about what are ways we can invest and what are ways we can do this work, just given everything that was happening in the world that year. And so, I didn't honestly face too many challenges. I just made sure that I aligned everything to a business case and our company's OKRs. And so they allowed me to create the role. And then they asked me if I wanted to bring somebody else on board. And I was like, who says no to having help, and especially in something this ambiguous and large. And so Malcolm came on and we've been doing it since.
And can I just add from a tactical perspective, like Cindy and I don't have direct engineering resources or design resources. So we have to just use a lot of influence when it comes to actually making changes to products or recommending changes to products by working with other product managers to get that done. And we're still in the early phases of that. There are some things that are being experimented on now, but it's a lot of influence because we don't have those things at our disposal.
We did get a lot of questions back on the sounding board. It's being asked, who exactly is part of the sounding board? How did you convince people to provide their feedback? How did you convince them to sign up? What did that whole process look like?
Yeah, so the tool's open to everyone in the company who is a full-time employee, so contractors can't participate. Anyone can submit a project or anyone can sign up to be a volunteer. You can be both, you can do one or the other. We did a launch in the end of August of last year. So we have bi-weekly company all hands meetings. So we launched it at that meeting. We're about to do a relaunch now. Yahoo has gone through lots of changes in the past 6 months. So we're about to do a relaunch of the product. But that's how people heard about it. We have a Slack channel where everyone who signs up to be volunteers on the tool is in that Slack channel. So when new projects come on board, you get notified in the Slack channel if you want to show interest, if you want to get feedback. And then just from how the tool works is someone who submits a project, they put the description of the project in, they say, I want people who have engineering background, I want someone who's in our Black ERG, XYZ. Volunteers go into the tool and they say, oh, this project looks interesting to me. There's like a show interest button. You just hit that button and you type up a description of why you think you would be a good person to give feedback. And then the project owner can go and create a cohort based on all the people that signed up. So 50 people could sign up to give feedback, but say you as a project owner only need 10 people, you would select 10 people from that 50 and create a cohort. And then the tool itself isn't used for the feedback giving. So there's no chat tools or anything in the tool. It's just a matchmaking service. So once the cohort's created, you can set up Google Meets, you can set up a Slack channel, you can do whatever you'd like to get that feedback done.
So there was another question about that feedback, and how is it provided? Is it screen recordings or tasks being provided that you want them to complete? How does that work?
So it really varies. If it's there's an ad campaign, maybe they want folks to review the creative markup that's going to be for that ad campaign. We've had folks from event planning come and they want to ensure that the speakers that they're bringing in for a certain event are diverse and are want to be vetted, if you will. So sometimes you just have folks come and look at the speaker list. The legal teams can use it for things. We had a cohort that was built around someone in our cybersecurity team wanted to get perspectives on the new Chinese cybersecurity law that went into effect, I think, the end of last year. And so they reached out to our Asian ERG, which Cindy is a global lead for that, to get feedback from some of our Asian employees around how the company should approach that law. And so it really varies on what the subject is of the project, but it really, like I said, it spans everything. So it's not just feedback on the products we build, it's on both external and internal projects.
And on a very different topic, someone asked about how Yahoo treats accessibility and inclusion. Are they seen and addressed as the same or different? How is that all structured?
Want to answer this, Denise?
Sure, yeah, this is Denise. So I think as you've seen in our presentation and how we've talked about it here at this session, accessibility is long established and has a really long and mature history at the company, whereas product inclusion is very recent and new, and I would say even new to industry. So I think we are still in the emerging stages of coming together as one. We just joined teams last year. And we were operating as separate teams, accessibility and product inclusion, although both of us are, very horizontal and work centrally across lots of different products, platforms, services. So I think you are seeing the midst of us merging together and becoming more combined. And, in our presentation, how we think about the work, product inclusion really is a more comprehensive, larger umbrella that accessibility is included underneath, if that makes sense. Accessibility is kind of one facet of product inclusion.
I also just want to jump in and just to clarify, because we keep saying product inclusion is new or nascent, and we're not saying that people haven't been working on equity and inclusion within products in the decades that tech has been, around and available. Certainly people have thought about this work. When we say product inclusion is new or newer, what we are saying is that I think before people who were just kind of interested in inclusion and equity were doing the work, maybe like siloed member of their team that wanted to focus on it, or maybe they were trying to raise awareness. But what we are seeing now is that people with titles like product inclusion or equity in tech, or any of those kinds of like buzzwords that we're hearing right now, are being actually like given a specific role to focus on this, or teams that are being built around this. And that's what I'm saying, that's why I'm saying that like we need to create this kind of like ecosystem where we're sharing our best practices, our case studies, our failures, et cetera, because these people have, people who've done this work have existed and continue to exist. But what we're seeing is that tech companies like Yahoo and others, if you do like job searches, you'll see like product manager, product inclusion, product manager of equity. And so that's what we mean. And then as Denise mentioned, like, we think that accessibility is just one dimension of identity that product inclusion should include. But it's interesting because accessibility has been around for a very long time, has standards, policies, laws. Product inclusion is much more ambiguous. So I think anybody who's kind of doing this work is trying to figure out how we kind of move forward together.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked too about the Accessibility Council. Is it like a champions program? Can you talk more about how that's structured?
Sure, this is Denise, and I love that question. So we actually did have at one point a champions program model in which we relied on volunteers who were passionate about accessibility to raise their hand and do quote unquote extra work doing accessibility in their daily job or advocating for accessibility throughout their team. We found that was not sustainable for us. As Malcolm mentioned, our company has gone through a lot of change recently, whether it be reorg or being acquired. And so we found that the champions model does not work for sustainability throughout an organization that's constantly evolving and changing. We found that through attrition or what have you, reorganization, the champions model kind of falls apart. And we really wanted to make sure we had that ownership mindset and empowered employees in a systemic way to make sure that accessibility was really embedded in our DNA, so that even if X, Y, and Z point people left the company, accessibility would still be there in the processes and operating procedures. So that's why we created the council. It's actually not a champions program at all. People did not volunteer to participate. People were actually told to participate. So we had all of our level 2s from our CEO nominate certain point people who needed to own accessibility within their domain. And they were then nominated and told to be on the council to represent their domain and own the work stream for accessibility throughout their domain. So it's a very different model in that it's following the approach that accessibility is everyone's job. It's actually not an extracurricular. It's not, you know, a nice to have. It's really integral to your job and to your whole domain's processes and systems. So the council serves as more implementation mechanism for our global accessibility policy, in that it's a have to, and it's a requirement. It's not, you know, if you have extra time or if you feel passionate about the work type of thing. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm happy to talk more about it.
I'll shift again. A couple folks have asked if there's any literature that you'd recommend reading or getting familiar with because it changed your point of view on accessibility to help shape it. Anything you can recommend there?
I mean, from a product inclusion perspective, we have to say Mismatch by Kat Holmes. Annie Jean-Baptiste has a book called Building for Everyone that is specific to the work she's been doing in the last 3 to 5 years. There are other things that that changed my perspective on things. There's something called The End of Average. I think Todd Rose is his name. That really helped me understand that, especially as a product manager, we're always building personas and thinking about like, well, let's capture kind of everybody in that bell curve. And this kind of destroyed that. And so that was something that was really eye-opening. I don't know, I feel like I usually have a list, but now I'm put on the spot.
I don't have any books, but Cindy and I and Denise are in a group called Equity Army, where we've kind of created some principles across various industries around product inclusion. You can look at that material at equity.army. It's not a book, but it's resources.
Yeah, that's great. And this is Denise. I have a few more books I just grabbed from my shelf. So What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World by Sarah Hendren. I would highly recommend. Being Human, Heumann by Judy Heumann. And Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. And she also has a great website as well. So I'd recommend those.
I love disability visibility.
That's great. And I think that's all we have time for questions. We didn't get to them all, but I think we got to a good mixture of them from everybody. So I want to thank you, Cindy, Malcolm, Denise, for all the time you spent today. It was great to have you. Friendly reminder to everyone listening, you can come back and watch the recording at any time. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of AxCon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.